Welcome back to our course on Excel 2013 Advanced. At the end of the last section I was stripping down the employee data that we'd received as a long uppercase string with semicolon separators. I've now finished splitting that up using the methods I covered in the last section, and now we've got a little bit more cleaning up to do of this data. So the first column we have there is the name column, and that looks absolutely fine in general, although there is a problem that's actually quite difficult to see, but I'll come back to that in a little while. The second column is the start date for each of the employees, and as you can see we seem to have quite a few problems with start date, because you can see that some of them have come out as numbers which are presumably real dates, so the number of days since January 1st 1900, etc., and some of them have come out correctly as text dates. Now if I click on one of the ones that isn't shown correctly, I get a little warning sign there, and very often if you click on that, not only does it tell you what the problem appears to be, but it will very often give you a good idea of what the solution to that problem might be. The number in this cell is formatted as text or preceded by an apostrophe. So what it's saying is that in this particular case it's got a text number 40697 in there, and clearly a real date is not text, it should be a number. If I click on the little drop down, I'm given options, and one of them is convert to number. Now in order for that to be treated as a real date I need it to be a number, so I'm going to click on convert to number, and now I'm going to change the format. And I'm going to change the format to the format of a date. So if I go into Format Cells, select Date, my default here, which is locale dependent, is month stroke day stroke year. Click on OK. That looks better. So we're really saying that this employee joined us on June 3rd 2011. Now that'll be the same problem with the others probably. I'll just quickly go through and sort those out as well. So you can see that the start dates look fine now. Let's move on to the next column, which is salary. Now in this case I've also got markers that indicate problems here. Let's click on the first one, check what the message is. It says number stored as text. So we've got another case here where we've got a number stored as text. In fact, I'll assume for the moment that it's the same problem for all of them. Note that when I'm doing something like I've done here, where I've imported data from another source, when I take it in that semicolon separated or comma separated value kind of format, quite often Excel will treat numbers as text, and I will quite often need to convert that text to being a number. And it can even happen in a fairly apparently haphazard way, as it did here, where some of these start dates came through as dates and some didn't. But with salaries they all seem to have suffered from the same thing. So I'm going to select the whole thing, click on the drop down and convert to number. Generally speaking, you can tell whether what looks like a number is formatted as a number or not by its alignment. If it's left aligned, it's probably being stored as text. If it's stored as a number, it will normally be right aligned. So if I do convert to number, they will all become right aligned. And then while they're still selected, if I go into Format Cells, choose Currency, I'm going to use the dollar symbol, but I don't want any decimal places. Click on OK, and I've got all of my salaries there now stored and displayed as numbers currency. So that's the salary column. Let's move on to the department column. Now sometimes some of the things you need to do maybe look a little bit repetitive, even allowing for the use of functions in Excel 2013. If you look at department here, I've got a department of MKTG. Data I've imported has actually flagged the marketing department as MKTG. I really want to call that marketing. Similarly, R&D I might want to call research and development. Admin I might want to call administration. So I might consistently want to use the full names of my departments. Now I could of course go through and manually edit those values. I can also use the find and replace function that I'll come to in just a moment. But there is a function, in fact there are two functions in Excel, text handling functions, that are worth knowing about. Substitute is one and replace is another. Now let me just insert a column here and I'll show you the use of the substitute function. Now the substitute function basically in a text string will substitute one string for another. So if I go for substitute, it says first of all, the first argument, the text. This is the text or reference to a cell that contains the text for which you want to substitute characters. So in this case that would be, for instance, D2. The next thing I do is to specify the old text. What am I actually looking for? Well, let me suppose I'm going to say at this stage that I'm looking for the string mktg, and then I specify what I want to replace it with. Let's suppose I want to replace it with marketing. Now the fourth argument there, the instance number, actually specifies which occurrence of that old text you want to replace. So if it occurs multiple times, you can specify which occurrence you want to replace. Now as far as this particular exercise is concerned, it's only going to occur once, so that's an optional argument. I'll leave that out and I'll just tick that. Now of course it doesn't find mktg there, but if I fill down, Control D, watch what happens. The one case where I do have mktg, it now says marketing. So that's the use of the substitute function. Now, as I said just now, one of the issues here is that this might well be quite a repetitive exercise. So having done that substitution, you may want to then run through and do another substitution of substituting admin with administration, R&D with research and development. So you may need to apply this function a few times, and this is where you get into the realms of writing program code to do something repetitively, but that's really outside the scope of what we're doing here. The other way you could do this is, of course, to go into find and replace. So if you went into the replace dialog, you could actually say find mktg, replace it with marketing, find admin, replace it with administration, and so on. And then, as you know, you should be used to using find and replace. That will be another way of achieving the same effect. You need to be a little bit careful if you're dealing with a very large set of data to make sure that the strings you're replacing don't occur in another unrelated situation. But if you're careful, that's a perfectly feasible and valid way of doing this kind of text replacement. So there we are. We've done effectively an import of some data from an external system, and we've used quite a few of the text functions mainly in order to clean that data up. There's still a little bit more to do, but as you can see, it's looking much better now. Notice one or two little side issues, a couple of little knock-on effects you need to be careful of. If you look at number 15, Charles Cook, the job title of VP suffered from conversion to proper case, became capital V small p, and that's the sort of thing to look out for when you're doing this kind of processing of bulk data. If I had had thousands of employees, I probably would have taken a sample of 20 and run through all of the processes that I was aiming to use first, just to make sure that the general ideas are okay. But you've still then got the issue that even in thousands of employees where you've done some kind of test, you may get the odd glitch like Charles Cook's job title. So you need to be vigilant the whole time you're doing this kind of processing. And now there's just one other function to mention. I'm sure you will have used it before. I did mention much earlier in this section that there is a problem that's virtually impossible to see, but which you should always be aware of, and that is that sometimes when you import data, you finish up with leading and trailing spaces. Now I'm just going to insert a column before column B here. And what I'm going to do is use the len function here to look at the length of Jose Juarez's name, and the length according to Excel is 13 characters. Now if you count those characters including the space between the comma and the second J, you'll actually see there are 12 there, not 13. And the reason it says 13, if I select that cell, click in the entry bar, you'll see there is actually a space between the final E and the flashing cursor. So there is a trailing space, and in fact most or all of those names have got trailing spaces. They may well have got leading spaces. Part of import very often introduces leading or trailing spaces, or sometimes they're in the data anyway. So it's very important to be able to trim leading and trailing spaces. Now the function you use for trimming leading and trailing spaces is trim, and if you look at the screen tip there, removes all spaces from a text string except for single spaces between words. So if you want to tidy up the spaces, the trim function is the one to use. We've looked at a selection of text functions in Excel 2013, and now we're ready to move on. I'll see you in the next section.